Let's deal with the technical aspects first, ladies and gentlemen. As was stated a little bit earlier, just less than an hour ago, the Attorney General, who I will say certainly is not a Supreme Court justice. The idea of Tish James in the Supreme Court is an interesting one, but she is currently the Attorney General of the state of New York, and that would mean that she is the highest ranked attorney for the state, and she put out a statement just a little bit ago, and I'm going to quote part of it. I support the Green Light Bill, and the Office of the Attorney General has concluded that it is constitutional. It is, after all, the role of the Attorney General to do just that, to argue that it is constitutional. We will not opine on any actions the federal government may or may not take. The legislation is well crafted and contains ample protections for those who apply for driver's licenses. If this bill is enacted and challenged in court, we will vigorously defend it. Not only do I thank her for that, but would point out to some of my colleagues that might have been undecided or have even taken a position on the floor, you still have time to change your vote based on that. Second, and this was mentioned by some of my colleagues, $57 million in tax revenue for the state, Mr. President, as well as decrease in rate of uninsured drivers and reduction of traffic fatalities. So all of those things, technically speaking, are why this bill is important. But I want to talk about a second thing, Mr. President, and more than a few folks have brought some of this up. It was difficult to sit and listen to some of the debate, particularly because it seems that some of my colleagues have a basic misunderstanding of the lives that these individuals live. And I will say for 1 second that it was stated before, but it must be stated again, and I have said it on this floor before. I understand when some of my colleagues use certain language, they're communicating something, whether they call these individuals who are people, and I will remind you as well, whether you like it or not, New Yorkers, they're here among us, they're back home in our districts, they're illegals according to you, they are aliens, they are criminals. Doing everything you can to dehumanize these people, I would remind you, I would plead for you to think about what you are actually doing. To take away from these individuals who are men and women, who are daughters and parents, who are sons and daughters, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These are individuals, again, who are on this floor or seeing us in the gallery. They're not illegals. They are not aliens. They are people. As was stated by Senator Gunardis, no human being is illegal. When you say it, there's something else that you're doing. So that's one thing. When someone on this floor asked repeatedly, why don't these people choose to become documented? It was a little difficult to hear, but I will admit that maybe it is perhaps because my colleague has not actually spoken to any individuals who have been undocumented. I would suggest perhaps that our colleague, Catalina Cruz, who's with us today, who was undocumented and is now a citizen, maybe you should speak to her. Maybe you should speak to some of the hundreds of people that come into our offices every day who talk to us about the difficulties that exist. There is no real path for citizenship. That is the reason why we have been fighting for immigration reform at the national level, lest you forget. So the idea that folks choose to live these lives is just a tad ridiculous. And furthermore, when you think about the fact that, as we have stated before, the actions that this national government is taking, because we are not disconnected from what's happening nationally. And I will remind everybody, if you do not remember, that this administration at the national level, in our name, has taken children and separated them from their parents as official government policy. 4-month-old. A 4-month-old child separated from their parents. Official government policy. Whether we're talking about the changes that they are suggesting to the public charge, whether it's the changes that they're suggesting to rules for the Housing and Urban Development Department, which would actually make it so that mixed status families couldn't live in any housing that was funded by federal government. Whether it's the Muslim ban that began this administration's attacks on immigrants, or actually the first attack happened much earlier, when this abomination that currently sits in the White House said, and I quote, I guess they're good people, but they're criminals and rapists. And some of them, I guess, are good people. Something of the sort that he said. The administration is doing that at the national level, and therefore, we have an obligation as a state to defend those individuals who, again, whether you like it or not, are New Yorkers. And that is what we're doing today. Voter fraud. This idea, and this again was talked about by some of my colleagues, this idea that there is this rampant voter fraud that's happening all over the country is a canard. It is a ridiculous notion. It is a solution looking for a problem. And it further goes to this idea that there's this perverse conspiracy of these illegal aliens that are getting together and are going to perhaps do ridiculous. Last but not least, when we talk about terrorism, we talked about safety, we talk about law and order. Whether it's this administration or whether it's some folks on the right who seem to forget that the reality is that most of the terrorism that happens in this country is right-wing terrorism and has nothing to do with immigrants. Lest we forget, the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995 was done by an American citizen. The Parkland, Florida shooting, the 2018 Tree of Life synagogue, all of these attacks have not been done by immigrants that are trying to hide among us. They've been done by right-wing terrorists who are American citizens. So again, we need to be clear about what we're doing. Oh, one more thing. There was a lot that I wanted to cover. I'm almost done. We call these individuals criminals, forgetting that it is not criminal law that they're breaking, but civil law. And I, again, will have you know that it was an attorney. Where is she at? Over there. It was an attorney who reminded me of this because she was an undocumented person, and now she is an attorney and an assembly member, and she reminded me that it is not criminal law that they're breaking, but civil law, and yet you continue to call them criminals. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, it is a technical bill that we're doing today that has been done by 12 other states, including Utah, that, a beacon of progressivism. So we are indeed giving New Yorkers the ability to have a license. But the conversation that we're having about this and about everything else related to immigration needs to be understood in the context of what's happening nationally. As New Yorkers, we have an obligation to defend other New Yorkers. And every one of these individuals, whether they're documented or not, are New Yorkers. Get that through your head, folks. They live in your districts. They live in mine. They're next to us at the grocery store. They're driving right now without a license, and I'm glad that we're going to be doing something to resolve that. Mr. President, I proudly vote in the affirmative.